safe place for salespeople to network and share ideas with their peers. So my name is Alex Abbott. I'm your host today. I'm the founder of Sapiro and also the creator of the Conversation Operating System. And I am incredibly excited to be joined by Mike Adams. But I'm going to hold that just for a moment. Let's start with Adam. Introductions.
Hi, I'm Adam Gray. I'm co-founder of DLA Ignite. We're the world's premier social selling education company. We help organizations generate more conversations. And we're the only organization in this space that has a training program which is accredited by an independent professional body, in this case, the Institute of Sales Professionals, which we think makes us rather special. It does make us, right? We don't think it does. It does make us rather special. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I would agree. But let's hear from our audience whether they think that makes us rather special.
Let's not. Hey.
Yeah, and I am delighted to welcome Mike Adams, who is the author of 7 Stories Every Salesperson Must Tell. Your questions are highly encouraged. I'm hoping this is going to be an interactive session, but without further ado, Mike, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a few words about you?
Sure. Yep, I'm very happy to be here. Happy to meet your audience. I guess I should tell a short story about why I'm here and what I do. One of the types of stories in the 7 Stories book, we call it a connection story. It's a story that says, who are you and why do you do what you do? What's your reason to be in front of your client? So like many of you on this call, I was a salesperson for very many years, a sales leader for more than 15 years. And I guess the only different thing about my career compared to probably most of you was I jumped industries 6 times in my sales career, mostly through poor management, not really through design. But in that experience of getting into a new industry, not knowing any of the terminology of the industry or, who my clients were or what I was selling, but having to sell in a short period of time, I kind of hit on stories as a way to quickly get myself up to speed, to be able to tell a story to a client, to find out what the stories were that I needed to hear. And I did that in large corporations, and I did it all over the world. I lived in 9 different countries around the world, including places like Russia, China, Norway, UK, US, Malaysia, Australia. And but I got sick of working for large corporations in 2015, and I wanted to see if I could solve the number one problem I had as a sales leader across all those industries. And that problem is very simply stated, how to get my salespeople to say the right thing. I think you might know what I mean. We, and I include myself in this, we often say the wrong thing. We jump in too quickly with our products and services and our offering. We don't really connect well before we kind of try to explore what's going on with our clients. We kind of miss each other. Yeah. And because I'd spent so many years sitting next to my sales guys, meeting senior clients and wanting to kind of kick them under the table, I thought I would see if I could solve that problem. And I started off in Melbourne in Australia. I'm currently in Hobart, Tasmania. Started off delivering a kind of combination of storytelling and classical questioning and listening skills, let's say variations of spin selling and solution selling, this kind of stuff. And after about 18 months or so, I had quite a few clients, mostly Australian clients. And because I'm an engineer by training, I thought I will ring up all the people that I've trained and I'll ask them very specific set questions to see what they remembered. It's a very salutary experience. What I discovered was almost all the people I trained remembered pretty much 0. Some of them told me about things I hadn't taught them, but a lot of them retold pretty accurately some of the stories that I'd told. They just remembered the stories. And that was an aha moment for me. That was when I realized that if you want to teach salespeople anything at all, it had better be in stories because they're not remembering everything. As a profession, us salespeople, we're pretty confident that we're good at our job, even though we're mostly not that great. Buyers have to buy anyway, and we don't really take instruction. But if we put stories into the instruction, and if you get the fundamental idea, and this is the fundamental idea is you need to tell a story to hear a story. If you want to find out what's really happening with your client, you've got to get them telling you what's happening specifically on their site.
So
that's a long introduction. Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, and that's great, Mike. There's a lot there I think we can start to unpick. But when I think about the role of a salesperson and the challenging job that they have in 2023, in largely as a result of that changing buyer behavior, if we were to take a sort of a logical flow, and I know buying isn't a logical linear flow necessarily from our perspective as salespeople, but if we think about prospecting and how digital we are today, and then we think about sort of deal, opportunity qualification, deal management, and closing. If we just separate those two things for a moment, I think most salespeople struggle to get in front of their prospects, their buyers, their contacts. And so what are your thoughts on being able to tell stories digitally before you're even in front of the prospect?
Yeah, well, that's, I think, the most interesting way to connect with your client is to tell stories. Your stories can be really short. They don't have to be long stories. You can introduce the concepts of your products and services in quite short stories. Now, I should be clear, because it's not always the case that people understand exactly what a story is. So stories have to be a sequence of events. This happened, because of that, this happened, and then this happened, like that. If there's no sequence of events about things that happen, then it's not a story.
Okay.
So that's the first thing to really appreciate. So the most common way to prospect is to engage your client with a success story, with an example of how another client has succeeded with what you do. And there's all sorts of ways to write that in social media. You can write it as a mystery, what happened next. You can start with the end and work your way backwards to how it started. You can definitely play around with the sequences, but for it to be a story, it has to concretely be about something that happened.
Okay.
And it could have a future element to it, but something happened, and therefore this is going to happen.
Yeah.
What it can't be is assertions and just facts and figures. It has to be a sequence.
Okay. So in a world where we are, our buyers are paralyzed by insight, what are some tips that you could, because there's so much insight out there, and salespeople have been taught for many years, it's all about how clever your insight is and get that in front of your buyers. But what are some tips that you can give our audience to take perhaps something that is factual, like insight, that is important to get in front of your buyer, potential buyer, but turning it into a story? That's one bit. And the other bit is, how human do you think we should make these stories?
Well, okay, I'll answer the second part first. Stories should be about people. They should have characters in them. That's fundamental.
Yeah.
To talk about insight, so probably the most famous work on insight in the sales field is the Challenger books, the Challenger Sale and the Challenger Customer. So those are the books that really formalized how to go about researching, creating insight. What they miss fundamentally, in my opinion, is realistic conversation models for delivering that insight, because they're works of academia, and they come across as dry assertions, those insights. That's typically the problem salespeople have, is they deliver insight as fact. as assertion. And they miss an important part with that. They miss their credibility. What's their credibility to deliver that insight? A friend of mine here in Australia laughingly calls it the problem of the 17-year-old salesperson delivering insight to the 55-year-old procurement manager. Who are you to deliver that? And the solution to that is, you have to do all of that work. You have to create that insight that's going to be valuable to your client. The Challenger books define insight as a piece of information that is commercially valuable to your client that they don't appreciate. They don't understand it yet. And the best way to deliver it is with what I call an insight story, which is the story of how you discovered it. How did you discover that insight? When you tell that as a story, it could well be that the character in that could be one of your researchers, it could be one of your marketing people. You tell that story about that person and how they discovered that insight. It instantly is interesting to the client. It solves the problem of the 17-year-old salesperson and the 55-year-old client because you're telling someone else's story, how they discover that insight. They listen to it. The client will start from the same position that you were in when you were working out that insight. Typically, you're trying to discover the insight, you have lots of false steps, and then you have this aha moment, this really works, and this is how it works, and this is what it means. So that story, the insight story, is the way to deliver insight, and the way any salesperson can do it with authority.
Okay, I love that. It reminds me, a bit of a shameless plug here, I'm afraid, but it reminds me of the journey I've been on myself for the last three years, and the program that Adam was talking about in his intro. Me and my company resell that program. So we've been testing outbound prospecting strategies for 3 years. And we came across this program. Adam and I worked together back in 2014 at Oracle, but I came across Adam again 2 years ago and had an aha moment. Became, the team and I became expert. Took a year to become experts in this program, and then we started tracking all the behaviors and creating insight as a result of following all of those behaviors that are in the program. And after 10 months, we've realized that by following these behaviors every day, every week, consistently, we can see more than a 10% call rate with our prospects, which outperforms any other form of cold prospecting. And that in itself is the story, right? It's the journey that we've been on.
That's the story. That's exactly the story. That's an insight story. And even, I'm sure it didn't work perfectly. There probably things went wrong and the rest of it. So, you can put that in as well. Yeah.
Okay. So it's important to have those, I guess, I'm thinking of a story and I'm thinking, well, you want the villains in the story. You want the characters. So for me,
the character of the insight story is the person who discovered the insight. So in the story you told, you were that person. So you tell the story from your perspective.
Yeah.
But, in a big sales team, very often the salesperson is not the person who discovered the insight, but they need to know how that insight was discovered, what was the journey, and be able to tell that so that they can really pass that meaning to the client. If they just jump to the insight itself, it's abstract and difficult for the client to accept.
Yeah, I guess that that when you give it the build up, like any film, you don't have and then he kissed her and they rode off into the sunset. There's a bit of stuff that goes before
we don't anyway. No, we don't start
to
there.
give that to give that context and meaning. And I think that a lot of the time when one is pitching one's services or products to an organization, there is not enough of that context being laid first. So, okay, we've got a load of clients and one of them got this and one of them got this and one of them got this. Is those facts, even though you're dressing it up as a case study, or in your own mind, you're using it as a case study or an example of a client success. Actually, it isn't. It's just a series of words. So you need to tell the story. There was a client, and we got very close to this particular person, and they were struggling with the following 3 issues. And what was interesting was they tried every way of solving those issues, and then they stumbled upon this. And what happened was that meant that they were able to do blah and blah and blah, and this was the end result that they got of that. And that, you take the listener on a journey, don't you? I mean, that
That's
was
right.
not the story that I would deliver because it was done on the fly, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, so another type of story that we describe in the book is called the success story. And the success story, the central character is your client, your other client who succeeded. So what was their situation before they met you, the vendor? What were their alternatives? What was they struggling with? How did they meet you? Almost always interesting. How did they meet you? Was that through request for tender, or did you meet them in a networking event? Did you cold call them? How did that happen? And then what's the plan that you worked on together, a mutual plan? We're going to make the client, the succeeding client, the central person, so they have agency in the plan. And then what failure did you avoid? What went wrong or could have gone wrong? What was the client concerned about? And then how did you succeed?
Yeah.
When you run a pattern, if you like, you avoid the problem of the case study, the classic marketing case study, which I'm going to tell in Australian style, which is, here's our other client in the shit. We came in and fixed everything, and now it's brilliant. This doesn't sell. This doesn't sell because your prospect doesn't want to be the bunny in the story, right? You're just making the vendor look good. You're not showing how the client actually solves their problem. So that's another class. That's a really important story for salespeople, how you tell the story of how your clients succeed with your help, with your guidance, but not with you as the hero.
Yeah. So there's a interesting question, great question here from Jackie about sharing insight from your book that you believe has the most significant impact on sales professionals. Is there one that really you think is the most impactful technique or story?
Significant insight that's in the book is what I already just quickly went through right at the beginning. It's the realization. This actually took me some time to realize this. I was already doing a lot of storytelling, but I was thinking of storytelling as an instrument to get what I want. And this is the wrong way to look at storytelling. And it's the wrong way to look at sales as well. Storytelling is a tool. So that it's a tool that allows you to be understood much better. When we don't speak abstractly, when we give examples, which is what stories are, we can be understood. But more importantly for salespeople, it's a tool for you to understand your client, because when you tell a story, the first thing they want to do is tell you one back. And it's that hearing the client story that's the true secret to storytelling. It's the exchange, the realization that you can hear what's really happening when you tell stories. If you assert things and just give facts and figures to your client, they're going to just assert back and you won't understand really what's going on. So it's this that gives you that mutual understanding. They understand you better, you understand them better. That's the insight that I discovered fairly recently.
I love that. I love that. The power of reciprocation. Adam and I talk
Correct.
about that a lot.
Yeah. And it saves a huge amount of problems, because a lot of sales are made with poor understanding. And then you have an implementation that goes badly, things get wrong, it costs a lot of money to fix. So when we get this proper understanding before we sign the contract, then we do much better business.
Yeah. And in the world of indecision, right? I'm sure we're all aware of Matt Dixon and the great. I mean, you referenced Challenger already, Mike, but Matt Dixon's and Ted McKenna's recent book, The Jolt Effect, talks about indecision. And when you and I spoke ahead of this call, you said to me that you can tell a story, or you can help salespeople tell a story about how to position the idea of change through the power of stories. And a lot of buyers are fearful of that change, therefore are paralyzed by indecision. What can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we kind of split our training program up into 3 parts. The first part is connecting and building trust. So who are you? Who is your company? Who is the client? Sharing stories around who you are and why you're there. The middle part is what we've already spoken about, really, which is positioning change via insights, via examples of success. We have other types of stories as well. And the third part is getting the decision. How do we might well have a client that understands that change is possible, understands maybe that they should change, but that doesn't mean they're going to change. So getting the decision in most sales situations, if you're selling anything substantial at all, beyond a few tens of thousands of dollars, maybe, there's going to be stakeholders involved. That decision process is complex, and stories can make a huge difference, because your stories can go into a client organization and influence it even where you're not. They can influence people even when you're not there. 2 types of stories that make a big difference there are influence stories. Influence story is the story that counters an objection. We call them anti-stories, actually. The client has a wrong idea or a wrong belief. And maybe I'll give you a quick example.
Yeah, please.
To come from one of our training programs, in fact. So one of my students, who was a sales training manager from a large IT services company, he was in the process of practicing his own influence story. And he said, Mike, I'm going to do an influence story for my boss who doesn't think we need storytelling in our sales training program. So I thought, well, yeah, go for it. That'll be a good one. And this is the story that he told. He was based in Houston. His name's Diego, and he was telling a story for his boss, Damien. He said, Damien, I acknowledge that our sales training program is really good. We've developed it over decades. We like it. And on top of that, it's pretty complete, and we don't have space or money to easily put something new in. But, being happy with what you have reminds me of my wife. We like to go mountain bike riding. We go to the hill country north of Houston. And I've been on it, my wife, for ages to upgrade her bike. And she would say, no, I'm not changing. It's part of my personality. I love my bike. But last week, we were out riding and her bike broke. The frame broke. And I said, okay, I'll push your bike. You take my bike. And when I got back to the car, she said, oh, my gosh, your bike is so much better than my bike. I can't believe I've been riding this old thing all these years. And then we reframe that with, so you see, you can be perfectly happy with what you have, but it doesn't mean there's not something better out there, like storytelling. And not only do I love that story told by one of my students, it led to business with that company. We've been training their global account directors since then. So the story worked on Damien.
So how?
But it's a nice way to use. So yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a salesperson. What you're telling me speaks. It's makes so much sense. How do I create my stories for each of those moments that could happen? Yeah.
More than that, though, how do salespeople learn to be pragmatic about whether the story they're telling, the story that I'm hearing, is the story that they're telling? Because one of the things that we have seen, and I'm going to tell you a story now, one of the things that we've seen many times when we work with clients is that the salesperson obviously has their own agenda and they're quite eager for that agenda to happen. And they're unable to put themselves in the shoes of the recipient. So one of them, here's a true example. The salesperson, the client that we were working with, was trying to grow their network and stimulate more conversations within a large retailer. And they were sending connection requests on LinkedIn that said something along the lines of, hi, Mike, I'm your account manager. I'd like to connect to more people in your company because I want to grow my network in your company. And this person couldn't understand why they were getting such a low connection rate. And obviously, as an outsider, you read that and you go, yeah, because what you've said is, hi, I'm the account manager for your company. I'd like to sell more things to your company. Can I connect to you so I can sell some things to you, please? And the person said, yeah, but that's not what I said. No, but that is what they heard, which is why you're getting such a low strike rate. So how do salespeople be pragmatic about saying, here's the story I'm going to tell. It isn't working. So rather than blindly continuing with that, how do I refine that so that they pick up what I want them to from it?
In less than a minute, Mike.
Yeah, well, I would say that person wasn't putting a story out there. Look, it takes time. It helps a lot if the team are working together with stories and sharing stories backwards and forwards, because you need to hear good salespeople using stories in order to become a master at it, right? So that would be, the kind of thing that you would take into a sales meeting and discuss, and how's that's not going to connect. That's not of interest to your client at all. How do you swap that around to be of interest to them? So yeah, good question.
So we're coming to the end now. We are trying to keep these shorter and sweeter for our audience. So Mike, where can people find you? And if they've enjoyed the conversation, how can they learn more about storytelling?
Well, they just hit Google with Mike Adams storytelling. They'll find my book and YouTube channel and anecdotes. We have a sales program that runs from anecdotes from the world's largest business storytelling companies. So yes, easy to find. Yeah.
Brilliant.
And yeah, delighted to also field any questions on LinkedIn if people have got questions on things like to know more.
And if there's one thing that you can challenge our audience to do to be better storytellers, what would it be?
Well, just think about your next meeting and just say to yourself, what story could I tell that would be of interest to this client? What would they like to know about? How could I put that in a story form? It might be an example of another client that succeeded. It could even be an example of important values for them, like sustainability or something like that. You could tell a story from your company about that. But just have a think about it and just have a go at telling one story and see what the effect is, see what you get back. You're likely to get a story back from your client.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Adam. Thank you to our audience. We will see you next time on Sales TV. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Alex.